Have you ever imagined what would happen if you could hear your own cry for help from the future? This idea might sound like it's straight out of a science fiction movie, but for Emily, an emergency call operator, it would soon become a terrifying reality. It was a night like any other, the monotonous sound of the switchboard echoing as the lights flickered dimly in the operations room. Emily, always focused on her duty, had no idea that this night would lead her to the brink of madness. When she picked up the phone to answer the first call, she never imagined she was about to receive a haunting premonition of her own fate. The voice on the line was hers, but distorted by fear and desperation. Confusion overwhelmed her. This was an emergency call, and she, in her role as the operator, had to help. However, the situation was becoming surreal. Her own cry for help reverberated in her ears, as if a specter from the future was trying to communicate with her. The call, although terrifying, was nothing more than an echo of what was to come. As the hours passed, the calls repeated, each one darker and more sinister than the last. The boundary between time and space seemed to shatter, leaving Emily trapped in a cyclical nightmare. She tried to remain calm, to steer the conversation toward help, but the desperation in her voice was unmistakable, and each time she heard her own voice pleading for assistance, a pang of terror gripped her heart. During those endless hours, fear became her constant companion. She sought answers. She consulted her colleagues, but none could understand. Moreover, the clock continued to tick, and the shadow of fatality loomed closer. The calls persisted, each time more vivid, more disturbing. In her mind, images of various scenarios emerged, each one more terrifying than the last. She wondered if what she was experiencing was a kind of warning, a means for life or fate to alert her to an imminent danger. She sat at the console, her hands trembling by the phone, waiting anxiously for the next call. Could she change her destiny? Was it possible to avert the inevitable? In a moment of desperation, she decided to take action. Emily began to investigate the numbers from which the calls originated. With each attempt, each number she dialed, it was as if she was drawn deeper into the abyss. She learned that the numbers belonged to other operators from different locations. It was as if she were trapped in a labyrinth of time, and each call was a clue leading her to a conclusion she couldn't comprehend. As the night grew darker, her mind filled with chilling images and dark premonitions. She felt time slipping away. Each call was an echo of a future that felt increasingly like a curse. In the midst of this chaos, she decided she had to share her unsettling experience. She contacted a group of experts in paranormal phenomena in an attempt to find answers. They spoke of parallel dimensions, of how time might be a malleable concept, and the possibilities of her traveling along her own timeline. But as she listened, she sank further into confusion. It was as if every theory they presented only intensified her already unbearable dread. Nonetheless, her instinct told her to keep going, that there was something more behind these calls. The operator within her clung to the hope that perhaps she could change the course of her destiny. The hours passed, and the tension was palpable. Emily felt the air grow thick, suffocating. Each time the phone rang, her heart would stop. She knew she was about to hear her own voice, her own cry for help. And so it was. The next call was not just a warning. It was a vivid prediction of her death. Through the phone, she heard the footsteps of an intruder, a cruel laughter, and a sound she could not identify but that froze her blood. In that moment, she realized she was not alone. Something or someone was stalking her, and every call was a reminder of what was to come. Seeking an escape, she headed to the break room, where her colleagues were gathered. She recounted her experience, trying to convey the urgency of her situation. However, their faces reflected disbelief. They decided to laugh, thinking it was just a case of exhaustion. But Emily knew the danger was real. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she could trust no one. The feeling of isolation enveloped her, and her survival instinct kicked in. As the night wore on, with each ring of the phone, her anxiety mounted. In the next call, The tone of her voice was different, more mocking, as if the caller reveled in the suffering they were causing. It confirmed her worst fears. There was a malevolent presence watching her, feeding on her fear. Yet, in a bold act, she decided she would not surrender. She was determined to fight against the destiny that seemed inevitable. Suddenly, the phone rang once more. Emily, her heart in her throat, picked it up. The voice that came through was not only hers but now included more. Laughter, whispers, and distorted echoes surrounding her. Her mind battled between madness and reality. Was it possible that all of this was a macabre game created by some being from another world? The answer was on the tip of her understanding, and in an instant, she decided she could not let it destroy her. The shadows in the room seemed to close in, and in a last-ditch effort to protect herself, she began to scream for help, calling out to her colleagues. In that moment, everything froze. The laughter faded, and darkness seemed to absorb the noise. Then the voice returned, clearer than ever, saying that the end was near and there was nothing she could do. But Emily was not willing to succumb. She looked around, searching for a way to escape, to break the cycle. It was then that she saw a glinting object on the table, a knife. In a desperate act, she grabbed it. She knew time was running out, that her life was at stake. But in her mind, a spark ignited. If she could wound her attacker, perhaps she could change the course of her destiny. The one who was stalking her must have been so close that she could feel its icy breath. Without thinking, she lunged for the door. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Emily confronted her fear, ready to fight. But when she opened the door, she found the darkness she had been dreading. The shadows surrounded her. The phone rang faintly in the background, but this time, she chose to ignore it. She understood that to break the cycle, she had to free herself. So, armed with her determination and the knife, she stepped into the darkness. The echo of her own voice resonated in her mind as she ventured beyond the threshold. The atmosphere was cold, and she felt time had stopped. The only light guiding her was the flicker of her own resolve. She had to fight. Each step brought her closer to her fate, and although fear tried to paralyze her, she felt stronger than ever. And despite knowing that the confrontation was inevitable, she also understood that she was not alone. Her courage and her will to survive would become her best weapons in this dark battle. Finally, she came face to face with the shadow that had been stalking her. Although fear attempted to immobilize her, she remembered her cries for help and the urgency of her situation. With a heart-wrenching scream, she raised the knife and charged forward. In that moment, everything stopped. The echo of her scream reverberated in the air, and for a brief instant, she felt free. This fight was not just for her life. It was for the salvation of her own soul. The shadows began to dissipate, the laughter faded away, and a deep silence filled the space. Emily had decided not to be a victim of her future, and in doing so, she had found her true power. Now, after facing the unimaginable, she stood there, breathing heavily but with a newfound inner strength. The uncertainty was immense, but she had managed to change her destiny. That night, she had not only survived, she had reconciled with her fear. But she was not going to be the same operator who started that day. She was no longer just a voice on the other end of the line. Now she was the woman who defied time and fate. If you ever feel like fear is consuming you, remember that there is a light within you that can change the course of your life. If you want to keep hearing more chilling tales, don't forget to like, leave your comment, and subscribe to my channel. Here, the night never ends, and the stories continue.